This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good morning. We're coming on the air because President Biden is about to address the nation concerning the latest U.S. efforts to offer security assistance and otherwise to Ukraine. President Biden just meeting moments ago with Ukraine's prime minister in person. The White House now working on providing hundreds of millions more in military aid for Ukraine. The Biden administration also moving to fast-track Ukrainian refugees coming to the U.S. beginning next Monday. The administration says Americans will be able to apply to the Department of Homeland Security to actually sponsor Ukrainian citizens, dubbing the operation Uniting for Ukraine. The president already promising to take in 100,000 refugees. And at this hour, Russian forces, as you know, are intensifying their attacks. We've been reporting here. This is part of that new offensive, Russia says, focusing on the eastern Donbass region. The Russian front now extending 300 miles. Ukrainian forces are refusing to surrender in that crucial port city of Mariupol. The last remaining fighters are refusing to surrender inside that massive steel plant there. A Ukrainian commander acknowledging in the last 24 hours that they are outnumbered by the Russians there 10-1, warning that they are now possibly facing their last days, if not hours, inside that steel plant. ABC News unable to independently verify reports that about 1,000 civilians might also be inside that plant for shelter. Up to 120,000 people are still thought to be trapped in Mariupol. To surrender, Mariupol would give Russia, of course, a crucial land bridge to Crimea, given the region we're talking about. Russia also with a new show of force, test launching a new intercontinental ballistic missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. Vladimir Putin declaring the launch a success and saying those who threaten Russia will now think twice. Let's take a listen to President Biden expected to announce this new aid to Ukraine.
Sorry, keep you waiting a little bit. I had the honor of spending some time with the Ukrainian Prime Minister who's in town today, and he is meeting with some of my cabinet members, including the Secretary of Treasury and others. And we had a good discussion. I've talked about what I'm about to tell you about today, as well as he was thanking the American people for their support, understands it's significant, and we talked about keeping everyone together in terms of Europe, the European Union, and others in the effort to stop Putin's brutality. But before I head out to the West Coast, I want to quickly update the American people on the latest steps we're taking to support the people of Ukraine and to hold Putin accountable for his brutal and bloody war. Russian forces have retreated from Kyiv, leaving behind them a horrifying evidence, and you've seen it, you reported it, you folks. And by the way, I don't say this often, but I think we should give enormous credit to the folks with your agencies that are on the ground in Ukraine, in these spots, and they're really, I've spoken to several of them. We owe them. But uncovering these evidences of their atrocities and war crimes against Ukrainian people is so clear to the whole world now. Now they've launched and refocused their campaign to seize new territory in eastern Ukraine. And we're in a critical window now of time where they're going to set the stage for the next phase of this war. And the United States and our allies and partners are moving as fast as possible to continue to provide Ukraine the forces that they need, the weapons they need, the equipment they need, their forces need to defend their nation. Last week, I signed an $800 million package of security assistance to Ukraine that included new capabilities like artillery systems and armored personnel carriers, equipment that is responsive to Ukraine's needs and tailored to support the intensified fighting in the Donbass region, which is a different war than in other places because both topographically it's different. It's flat, it's not in the mountains, and it requires different kinds of weapons to be more effective. Today, I'm announcing another $800 million to further augment Ukraine's ability to fight in the east, in the Donbass region. This package includes heavy artillery weapons, dozens of howitzers, and 144,000 rounds of ammunition to go with those howitzers. It also includes more tactical drones. In the past 2 months, we've moved weapons and equipment to Ukraine at record speed. We've sent thousands of anti-armor and anti-missile helicopters, drones, grenade launchers, machine guns, rifles, radar systems. More than 50 million rounds of ammunition had already been sent. The United States alone has provided 10 anti-armor systems for every one Russian tank that's in Ukraine, a 10-to-1 ratio. We're sharing and will continue to share significant timely intelligence with Ukraine to help defend them against Russian aggression. And on top of this, these direct contributions from the United States, we're the outfit facilitating the significant flow of weapons and systems to Ukraine from other allies and partners around the world, like the S-300 long-range anti-aircraft systems that Slovakia recently transferred to Ukraine. We are getting them in there. We won't always be able to advertise everything that our partners are doing to support Ukraine and fight for freedom, but to modernize Teddy Roosevelt's famous advice, sometimes we will speak softly and carry a large javelin, because we're sending a lot of those in as well. But we're not sitting on the funding that Congress has provided for Ukraine. We're sending it directly to the front lines of freedom, to the fearless and skilled Ukrainian fighters who are standing in the breach. You got to admit, must be amazed at the courage of this country, the resolve that they're showing, not just their military, but the average citizen, men and women, young men, young women as well. It's, the sustained and coordinated support of the international community, led and facilitated by the United States, is a significant reason why Ukraine is able to stop Russia from taking over their country thus far. Every American taxpayer, every member of our armed forces can be proud of the fact that our country's generosity and the skill and service of our military helped arm and repel Russia's aggression in Ukraine, to beat back Putin's savagery that tried to seize Ukraine's capital and wipe out Ukraine's government. The Battle of Kyiv was a historic victory for the Ukrainians. It was a victory for freedom, won by the Ukrainian people with unprecedented assistance by the United States and our allies and our partners. Now we have to accelerate that assistance package to help prepare Ukraine for Russia's offensive that's going to be more limited in terms of geography, but not in terms of brutality. Not in terms of brutality. Combined with our recent drawdowns, it will ensure a steady flow of weapons and equipment into Ukraine over the next few weeks. However, with this latest disbursement, I've almost exhausted the drawdown authority I have that Congress authorized for Ukraine in a bipartisan spending bill last month. In order to sustain Ukraine for the duration of this fight, next week I'm going to have to be sending to Congress a supplemental budget request to keep weapons and ammunition flowing without interruption to the brave Ukrainian fighters and continue to deliver economic assistance to the Ukrainian people. My hope is, and my expectation is, Congress would move and act quickly. And I want to thank the Congress, Democrats and Republicans, for their support for the people of Ukraine. Our unity at home, our unity with our allies and partners, and our unity with the Ukrainian people is sending an unmistakable message to Putin. He will never succeed in dominating and occupying all of Ukraine. That will not happen. In addition to bolstering Ukraine's resistance on the battlefield, we're also demonstrating our support for the people of Ukraine. Today, the United States is announcing that we intend to provide an additional $500 million in direct economic assistance to the Ukrainian government. This brings our total economic support for Ukraine to $1 billion in the past 2 months. This is money the government can help use to stabilize their economy, to support communities that have been devastated by the Russian onslaught, and pay the brave workers that continue to provide essential services to the people of Ukraine. These past weeks have seen a terrible human cost of Putin's ambition for conquest and control. Approximately two-thirds of all Ukrainian children have been displaced from their home. More than 5 million Ukrainians have fled their country. It's an absolute outrage. The idea this is happening, approaching the second quarter of the 21st century, is just, Last month when I was in Europe, I announced that the United States would welcome 100,000 Ukrainians so that we share in the responsibility of supporting Ukrainians fleeing Putin's war machine. We've already welcomed tens of thousands of Ukrainians to the United States, and today I'm announcing a program, Unite for Ukraine, a new program to enable Ukrainians seeking refuge to come directly from Europe to the United States. This new humanitarian parole program will complement the existing legal pathways available to Ukrainians, including immigrant visas and refugee processing. It will provide an expedient channel for secure legal migration from Europe to the United States for Ukrainians who have a U.S. sponsor, such as a family or an NGO. This program will be fast, it will be streamlined, and will ensure the United States honors its commitment to go to the people of Ukraine and need not go through our southern border. We're also continuing to ratchet up the pressure on Putin and further isolate Russia on the world stage. Yesterday, the Treasury Department rolled out additional measures to crack down on the entities and individuals attempting to evade our unprecedented sanctions, not just ours, but throughout the West. Today, I'm announcing that the United States will ban Russian-affiliated ships from our ports, as they did in Europe. That means no ship that sails under the Russian flag or that is owned or operated by a Russian interest will be allowed to dock in a United States port or access our shores. None. None. This is yet another critical step we're taking in concert with our partners in the European Union, United Kingdom, Canada, and further to deny Russia the benefits of international economic system that they so enjoyed in the past. We don't know how long this war will last, but as we approach the 2-month mark, here's what we do know. Putin has failed to achieve his grand ambitions on the battlefield. After weeks of shelling Kyiv, Kyiv still stands. President Zelensky and his democratically elected government still remain in power. And the Ukrainian armed forces, joined by many brave Ukrainian civilians, have thwarted Russia's conquest of their country. They've been bolstered from day one by an unstinting supply of weapons, ammunition, armor, intelligence from the nations of the free world, led by us, the United States. As Russia continues to grind out the military advances and the brutalities against Ukraine, Putin is banking on us losing interest. That's been my view. You heard me say this from the beginning. He was counting on NATO, European Union, our allies in Asia, cracking, moving away. He's betting on Western unity will crack. He's still betting on that. And once again, we're going to prove him wrong. We will not lessen our resolve. We're going to continue to stand with the brave and proud people of Ukraine. We will never fail in our determination to defend freedom and oppose tyranny. It's as simple as that. So again, I want to thank the American people. Thank the American people for their support of the Ukrainian people. This is our responsibility, it seems to me, and we've been able to hold the whole world together in this effort. So thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to take just one or two questions. I got a plane to catch.
What does Putin claiming control over Mariupol mean? How significant is that?
Well, first of all, it's questionable whether he does control Mariupol. One thing for sure we know about Mariupol, he should allow humanitarian corridors to let people on that steel mill and other places that are buried under rubble to get out. That's what any head of state would do in such a circumstance. And so there is no evidence yet that Mariupol is completely fallen.
Mr. President, on Title 42, sir, are you considering delaying lifting Title 42?
No, what I'm considering is continuing to hear from well, first of all, there's going to be an appeal by the Justice Department, because as a matter of principle, we want to be able to be in a position where if in fact it is strongly concluded by the scientists that we need Title 42, that we be able to do that. But there has been no decision on extending Title 42. Thank you.
Mr. President, how long can the U.S. maintain the level and pace of this military support for Ukraine?
Well, we have the capacity to do this for a long time. The question is, are we going to continue to maintain the support of the international community and keep the pressure on Putin to prevent him from overrunning the country, number one, and number two, make sure we continue to maintain the economic sanctions, which over time, and we're beginning to see it, are devastating their economy and their ability to move forward. So the most important thing right now is maintain the unity. So far, so good. Thank you very much.
President Biden at the White House talking about new steps to help Ukraine defend itself against the Russians, talking about how the Russians have retreated from Kyiv, leaving behind enormous atrocities and war crimes, is what he labeled what we have witnessed, the world has witnessed. Yet again, he talked about Russia's new phase here in the East, saying we are entering a critical window in helping Ukraine, mentioning the $800 million in military assistance last week that he approved, saying he has now approved another $800 million more in heavy artillery, howitzers, in addition to javelins, tactical drones, which we've reported on here, and also $500 million in help for the government of Ukraine to sustain that government in the middle of this invasion from the Russians. A significant amount of money and military help on the way to Ukraine. Let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega. The president also talking, Cecilia, about what he believes is the U.S. responsibility here to keep the allies united in helping Ukraine.
Yeah, and that question on how much longer the United States can continue to help bankroll this war was from our colleague here at the White House, Karen Travers, and it's a really important one because you've got the president promising even more money, hopeful for even more money, saying today that he's going to ask Congress for additional support to bankroll even more money, and he's basically signaling here that the United States wants to continue to keep helping, but it's really going to come down to this coalition of international support and keeping this coalition together. That is the big question right now, is whether other countries will continue to stay on the same page with the United States. David, you mentioned all of that support, $800 million last week, $800 million today, that $500 in economic aid from the Treasury. That is going to help with things like salaries and pensions for Ukraine. Some huge numbers here. We're talking about more than $3 billion really since the start of this war. The president, I'll give you one more number here, saying that $1 billion just in the past 2 months. You're seeing the type of aid and support, military aid from the United States to Ukraine shift as those needs in that war shift, more need for long-range artillery and ammunition. That's what's going to them now. David.
Cecilia Vega live at the White House. And as we talk about all these numbers here, we are aware of the dire situation on the ground in Ukraine. Let's get right to our foreign correspondent, James Longman, who has just been talking with people leaving Mariupol. And James, you heard the president there say, despite Russia's claim that Mariupol has fallen, though clearly a city on the brink, he said it is not clear that the Ukrainians have lost the fight for Mariupol, at least not yet. And you were telling us before we came on the air of the desperation, the descriptions from the people escaping that city.
Yeah, David, I mean, as I talk to you now, there are families reuniting all around us here. We're in Zaporizhia, which has been kind of a staging point for people getting out of Mariupol. We just saw 3 buses pull up, packed full of people. I'd say in each one, maybe about 30 people standing room only, mostly women and children and elderly people. I spoke to one man who got off, Vitaly. He was a man, I think probably in his late 60s and his 70s, and he had told me he was living underground for more than 20 days. And the journey out, also horrific. I mean, he said there was nothing left in Mariupol. He was crying, talking to me about just how awful the last month for him has been in that city, but also the journey out. 15, 20 checkpoints on the way out of Mariupol to get out of the east towards parts where Ukraine is still in control, where we are here. And at every single one, ritual humiliations, Russian soldiers forcing them to get off the bus, give over paperwork, looking at their documents, telling men to take their clothes off to check for tattoos, because that's a sign that perhaps you have an affiliation to the military here, so Russians are looking out for that. This man, an elderly gentleman, had his photograph taken, his fingerprints taken. Everyone, they feared death before getting here. And one of the big things that President Biden was talking about there was help for refugees who are leaving Ukraine, because of course so many of them have now been displaced by this war, moving to other parts of the country. It's more than 10 million inside the country, 5 million refugees, but so many won't be able to go home, and people in Mariupol will not be able to return because Russia wants to control that place permanently. David?
Just a reminder why it's so important that we have you and the team there on the ground. We appreciate your extraordinary reporting, James. You heard James Longman there just describe what it's like for Ukrainians just trying to get out of Mariupol, facing multiple checkpoints, questioning from the Russians, in some cases, as James just described, being told to take their clothes off, checking for any kind of tattoos or allegiance to the Ukrainian military. I want to bring in Martha Raddatz because, Martha, you've reported extensively here on the military help going to Ukraine. You heard the president list what's on the way: heavy artillery, howitzers, and these tactical drones that you've reported on, and just how extraordinary they are, given how small they are. You can carry them in a backpack, but the damage they can inflict.
Exactly, David. They're called the Switchblade drones. We've already given about 700 of those Switchblade drones. They are like little kamikaze drones. You load them with explosive. As you said, you can put them in a backpack. They launch them, and then they can travel many miles and go right for the target and explode. You can also call them off, abort the mission if they see that there are civilians in the area. So this is something the Ukrainians have really wanted and say they have been very effective, David.
All right, our thanks to Martha Raddatz, to James Longman, to Cecilia Vega this morning. President Biden announcing moments ago more help from the U.S. on the way, military aid and assistance to the government there. Another $800 million in military aid this week, in addition to the $800 million last week. And as Cecilia mentioned, the $500 million to help the government of Ukraine. Our coverage will continue on ABC News Live, abcnews.com. And of course, I'll be back with the entire team a little later today for World News Tonight. I'm David Muir in New York. For many of you, Good Morning America continues in a moment. For the rest of you, I'll see you later today. Good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.